August 31st, 1997, the day Lady Di died. Media outlets have always filled their covers telling the details of the lives of the world's most powerful people. Talking about the extravagances of those who have the most always sells. In that sense, the vicissitudes of royalty and aristocracy were a blank check for the mercenaries of yellow journalism. Princess Diana, however, managed to captivate everyone on another level. The British showed an unprecedented esteem for her. She quickly became known as the People's Princess, and while many made sure to expose her dark miseries, her followers always sided with her loyally. Diana, better known as Lady Di, enjoyed such popularity that the crown began to look at her with some distrust and suspicion. She is perhaps considered the most famous and photographed woman of her time. Her life and work made her a true myth. Her sudden death filled everyone with speculations, and conspiracy theories did not wait. Was it really an accident? Why, 25 years after her physical disappearance, is there still talk that it could have been all a homicide? Today we will learn about the story of Lady Di and focus on her mysterious death. But before we start, please leave a like if you're interested in this type of videos, and also feel free to leave a comment below with possible suggestions for future videos. Let's get started. Tebut heard a knock at the door and was alarmed. It was 6 in the morning. The first light was coming in through the huge windows of his apartment in Notting Hill. Before he could even grab his standard issue weapon, they insisted again. Tebut, being the good bodyguard that he was, knew how to keep a cool head, which didn't prevent a horrible premonition from overwhelming him. He knew that what awaited him upon opening that door was bad news, but he couldn't imagine it would be that bad. When he was told that his boss and friend had lost her life 2 hours ago in a Paris hospital, Tebut was paralyzed for a few seconds. The first thing that came to his mind was the conversation he had with her just 24 hours in the past. A call in which the woman had informed him that she would not return to London on the agreed date because the press siege was at its worst, and she preferred to rest a few days in the French capital. After divorcing, she had given up royal protection for fear of being spied on, and had hired Tebut as he was the man she trusted the most. A man who was now completely dismayed until he received an order. He had to organize a huge funeral in record time for a person who was loved by almost the entire population. Without wasting time, Tebut urgently traveled on a commercial flight. Upon entering the hospital room where the lifeless body was, Tebut was outraged. The windows had no curtains, and he could see how journalists were stationed on neighboring roofs in a desperate search for a scoop. He quickly asked for blankets to cover the windows and complained to the medical staff and authorities about the lack of tact they were showing. There was another problem. No one could move the body until the funeral home team designated for deaths of that magnitude arrived. Tebut asked that the woman be moved to the basement, safe from the most perverse gazes. Then he sat next to her, and for 10 hours in silence. He took care of Lady Di for the last time. During those hours, he had enough time to reminisce about the moments they spent together, and particularly remembered a letter from her written just 2 years ago. A letter that said the following: "This phase of my life is the most dangerous. My husband is planning an accident in my car. He is using us in every sense of the word." Tebut, despite being a brave man of tough metal, couldn't help but feel a chill running down his spine. Thanks to some interviews that Lady Di gave to Andrew Morton for the publication of a book with her biography, we know some details about her childhood. Details that are not at all happy. To be precise, Diana Frances Spencer was born in Park House, Sandringham on July 1st, 1961. She was the youngest daughter of John Spencer, 8th Earl of Althorp, and Frances Ruth Roach. She grew up in a family of minor nobility along with her 2 sisters and younger brother. She spent the first years of her life in the family residence, where she received her first education from governesses. Photos from those early years always show her bright and smiling, but her memories tell a different story. Diana saw at an early age how her father slapped her mother, days before she left him for the man she was having an affair with. This began a bitter battle between her parents for legal custody of her and her siblings. Diana did not hesitate to describe her childhood as traumatic. In her words, she often felt like a nuisance to her parents. She found out that they actually wanted a boy when she came into the world. Just a year before her birth, her mother had given birth to a boy who died only 10 hours into life. Diana claimed that for a long time the presence of that dead brother haunted her and brought her a gloomy discomfort. Then, with the divorce of her parents, came the constant change of home, their struggle to please her with material things. Her room was filled with novel toys, expensive dresses, increasingly larger teddy bears. However, her nights were dark and filled with loneliness. In 1968, she entered school in King's Lynn. In 1970, she moved to the Riddensworth Hall Girls Boarding School, and in 1973 she entered West Heath, another boarding school in Kent County. She never wanted to go to university, and only spent a few months at the Wiedemannet Institute in Switzerland, studying French, dressmaking, shorthand and typing. She finally settled in London. There she worked for several companies until in November of 1977, her life changed forever. Carlos, the eldest son of Queen Elizabeth II of England and heir to the British throne. He crossed her path and unknowingly sealed her fate. Diana and Carlos met thanks to one of her sisters, Lady Sarah, who had briefly dated the Prince of Wales in 1977. He was 29 and she was only 16 when they met. Diana exclaimed, "God, what a sad man!" In the summer of 1980, the couple met again at a house owned by a mutual friend. In the morning, a polo match had been organized, then they enjoyed a barbecue and later sat on a hay bale. Diana and Carlos began to chat. He was still very distressed, due to his uncle's death, who was murdered by the Irish Republican Army the previous year. She told him that she had seen him on television during the funeral and that he seemed very alone, and added, "Someone should take care of you." There they had their first kiss. A real and deadly romance was beginning. From then on, the prince began to invite her to the ballet and the opera, although they were never alone and were always surrounded by his friends. Diana quickly delighted everyone with her charm and spontaneity. She seemed like the perfect candidate to become the new Princess of Wales. Everyone assumed she was a naive young woman and therefore perfectly malleable. They couldn't imagine how wrong they were. Besieged by everyone, Carlos felt he should give that relationship a chance. They saw each other only 13 times before walking down the aisle. We all know that for many 13 is an unlucky number, and indeed things were not going to end well for them. Although of course the wedding was dreamy. On February 24, 1981, the Buckingham Palace spokesperson announced the official engagement of Lady Diana Spencer and Prince Charles. From that moment on, Diana moved her residence to Clarence House, the Queen Mother's residence. The couple's wedding, which took place on July 29, 1981 at St. Paul's Cathedral in London, became an event of vast international repercussion, broadcast on television to 700 million viewers. The main members of the European aristocracy and 170 heads of state did not miss the ceremony. The bride arrived at the cathedral in a carriage. She arrived solo, her voluminous veil barely fitting inside. The engagement ring that Carlos gave her was chosen by her. It was a ring with an oval sapphire and 14 diamonds surrounding it. The designers of Lady Di's wedding dress installed a safe to safeguard and keep the sketches and details away from the media. After showing them to Diana, they destroyed them because photographers were looking in the trash for clues about what the design would be like. In addition, they prepared an alternative model in case the original dress was leaked. The imposing train of the dress was 8 meters long and featured 10,000 embroidered pearls. Diana also insisted on wearing voluminous sleeves and cinched waists, something that was later copied by dozens of brides around the world. The tiara had 1,930 diamonds. It was a family heirloom that in 1919 was given as a wedding gift to her grandmother. The wedding cake was made by the Royal Navy Cooking School. It had 5 tiers, was 1.5 meters tall, weighed about 100 kilos, and its preparation began 14 weeks in advance. The top tier was crowned with a cascade of white orchids, wild lilacs, and fuchsias. However, not everything was as if it came out of a fairy tale, as they made sure to mention everywhere. Diana had to accept conditions of royalty that are dismissed today and at that time were quite questionable. For example, she had to undergo a virginity test taken by the Queen's gynecologist. From that moment on, the crown never took its eyes off her. Years later, Diana would name that day as the worst day of her life and claim to feel like a lamb heading to the slaughter when she woke up that morning. On June 21st, 1982, the new princess gave birth to her firstborn, Prince William, at St. Mary's Hospital in Paddington. The second son of the Prince and Princess of Wales, Henry or Harry, was born on September 15, 1984. Despite the family's attempts to present a united front, Diana's solo trips became increasingly frequent, and in May 1992, after returning from India and Egypt, the first rumors of their separation became public. The B-side of her supposed perfect life began to come to light. We now know that perhaps that luxurious marriage should never have happened. Charles was in love with someone he couldn't marry, Camilla Parker Bowles. He never stopped seeing her, and above all, loving her. Diana confirmed it when she discovered an engraved bracelet that Charles had bought for his lover shortly before the wedding. Trapped in her own labyrinth 5 months into her marriage and pregnant, Diana had thrown herself down the stairs at Balmoral. 5 years later, in desperation, she had taken a knife and stabbed herself in the chest and legs. She was seeking help in an environment that was distant and always more concerned with the weekly schedule than with her emotions. A very cruel mirror of what her childhood had been. In 1986, with her marriage in shambles, Diana had her first affair with riding instructor James Hewitt. She also had affairs with art dealer Oliver Horner and car salesman James Gilby. In June of 1994, Lady Di wore a dress to the annual Vanity Fair gala that would become known as the Revenge Dress. A body-hugging black silk strapless dress that showcased her as elegant, sensual, and empowered. Charles had confessed on television what by that point was already an open secret, that he had been unfaithful. The broadcast was an attempt to bring the prince closer to the people and to gain some sympathy in the face of Diana's overwhelming popularity. An unhappy prince whose wife was unfaithful presented a very weak image for the crown. On July 12, 1996, the Queen of England's press office announced the amicable dissolution of the marriage between Charles of England and Diana of Wales. The agreement also stipulated that Diana would remain part of the royal family and would occasionally receive invitations from the Queen herself or the government. In addition, she was allowed to keep all her jewelry and was compensated with £17 million and granted an annual pension of £400,000. The divorce had an unexpected consequence. From Carlos's experience, many millionaires began to sign prenuptial agreements to determine what would happen to the fortune and the children, in case of mutual agreement of divorce. After that, Carlos appeared for the first time in a public event with Camilla Parker Bowles in 1999 at the Ritz in London. 200 photographers were waiting for them. By that time, Diana had been dead for 2 years. In the years following the separation, Diana lent her public image to various humanitarian organizations and appeared at numerous events in favor of the most marginalized sectors of society. While becoming a sort of superstar of Marilyn Monroe's caliber, Diana used all that fervor to transform it into something useful. Every photo on her charity tours aimed to shed light on a sector of marginality. With brief but forceful gestures, she provoked enormous changes. She was the first to be seen shaking hands with an acquired immune deficiency syndrome patient, at a time when talking about human immunodeficiency virus was taboo and the patient was stigmatized. She was also the first royal to take off her gloves to shake hands with those she visited and, after Mother Teresa of Calcutta, the most visible face of aid to leprosy patients. She was president and patron of 100 charity organizations, among which stand out the Great Armour Street Children's Hospital in London and the Royal Marsden Hospital, specialized in cancer treatment. Her humanitarian trips included visits to hospitals, schools, and charity events in Angola, Australia, Bosnia, Egypt, India, Pakistan, and Argentina, all over Europe. One of her most visible struggles was against landmines alongside the international campaign to ban landmines, which for its work won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1997. Her humanitarian attitude was always taken by the royal family as a provocation. The life of Diana Spencer, both during her marriage and after her separation, was a recurring theme in the tabloid press, and the so-called Diana mania, in fact, extended beyond the borders of the United Kingdom. All her public appearances received special treatment from the international media. In addition, according to Majesty magazine, Lady Di generated about £15 million in advertising for the manufacturers of the items she used. The last man Diana was linked with was the Egyptian-born millionaire Dodi Al-Fayed. They seemed happy and going through a very good time, but as you can imagine, no paparazzi wanted to lose track of them, something that would ultimately condemn them. On the night of August 30th to 31st of 1997, Diana and Dodi lost their lives in a horrific car accident as they tried to evade photographers and were driving at high speed through the Alma Bridge tunnel in Paris. Al-Fayed died on the spot. Diana Spencer was taken to the hospital, where she died a few hours later. Many reports, investigations, and experts concur with the official account of the events. That Diana was in a car going 160 kilometers per hour, driven by a man who was intoxicated, and that this factor had triggered the tragedy. But others still believe that something more secretive and intentional happened that night. Conspiracy theories take various forms, but they all point to the same place, that someone of great power for some reason wanted to kill Diana. Those beliefs were so convincing and so widespread that with the help of Egyptian businessman Mohammed Al-Fayed, Diana's boyfriend's father, the Metropolitan Police were forced to launch Operation PAGET, an investigation to establish if there was any truth in the theories. The report examined 175 theories about what happened that night, some of them minor and others quite profound. One of the main theories is that Diana was pregnant. This, according to Mohammed Al-Fayed, was the motive for the murder. Fayed said that the royal family could not accept that an Egyptian Muslim could one day be the stepfather of the future King of England. That's when they planned to kill her. Others claim that the paparazzi intentionally caused the car to crash, responding to darker interests. Conversely, some blame the driver, Henry Paul, for the incident. Henry Paul was the head of security at the Ritz Hotel in Paris, but conspiracy theorists believe he was on the payroll for security services in France or the United Kingdom, or maybe both. There are witnesses who claim that on that day, Henry had received an unusual sum of money. People who doubt the official course of events say that the claim that Henry was drunk at the time of the accident is not only false, but was a lie spread in the media to cover up the murder. And that was done in part by swapping his body with someone else, so that the toxicology results would appear correct. Following these lines, it is also believed that Diana's medical care was deliberately sabotaged. As if this wasn't enough to create more and more confusion, the analysis carried out on the remains of the car Diana was in revealed that the car had been in contact with a Fiat Uno, which left traces of white paint on the body of the Mercedes, although all attempts by the French police to find the car were futile. Despite the fact that no one had seen a Fiat inside the tunnel, some witnesses reported the presence of one leaving the underpass. The phantom car theory continues to keep many investigators awake. The death of another of the princess's bodyguards was also studied, and theories were woven that speak not only of a provoked death, but of many, all interconnected, all in some way commissioned by a royalty that had lost patience with that girl who seemed to get along so well with everyone, and who did not follow to the letter the social norms they wanted to impose on her because of her relationship or ex-relationship with the prince. The operation that studied these theories lasted years, cost millions of pounds, and thanks to it, it was discovered that these lines of investigation had no basis, that everything that happened that night was incredibly unfortunate. However, when everything seemed to be said, Anonymous came into play. According to the complaint by Anonymous launched in 2020, Diana's death was caused to prevent her from revealing the cases of corruption and child sex trafficking that would theoretically involve the English royal family. In the activist hacker group's tweet, it was claimed that Prince Charles kept a royal aide by his side despite being aware of several of his alleged violations. This accusation is still being investigated to this day. The British royal house, which initially showed not a few hesitations, acceded to the popular demand and held a superb funeral in his honor at Westminster, which was broadcast live on television and was attended by nearly 2 million people. During the 4 weeks after the funeral, the suicide rate in England and Wales increased by 17%, and cases of self-harm by 44.3% compared to the average in the same period in the previous 4 years. Experts assured that this phenomenon was caused by a feeling of identification. Tabloid media and paparazzi faced strong social condemnation for their actions. We can say without fear of being wrong that they learned nothing from the matter. Carlos and Camilla married in a 2005 civil ceremony in Windsor. Since then, they have been together scandal-free. Prince Harry continued his mother's legacy in the fight to eradicate landmines. Both he and his brother, Prince William, and his sister-in-law, the Duchess of Cambridge, Kate Middleton, created their own foundation that carries out many charitable works. The Royal Foundation. Lady Di was always considered an exemplary mother and a woman full of ideals. After her death, she received numerous tributes, and there were even proposals for canonization that were ultimately dismissed. Her figure is still idolized in different parts of the world, and she is considered ahead of her time, a woman who, perhaps for not wanting to be caught and pigeonholed by the Queen, ended up in a terrible checkmate. And that's it for today's video on the anniversary of Lady Di and of her unfortunate death, her sad and also mysterious death. If you're interested, please leave your like below, subscribe if you haven't done so yet, and I'll leave a couple of recommendations here for you to continue marathoning on this channel. I also invite you to leave a comment with a suggestion for a possible future video. My name is Magnus Mephisto, and this was the day that